I've never come across a phone so confused and conflicted with its identity. A phone that in some aspects clearly bashes the competition, but in some struggles to keep up. A phone much better than its previous iteration, but not doing nearly enough to reach the realms of perfection. Hey everyone, this is Siddharth Oprani and this is my review of the Google Pixel 8 Pro. I think one area where Google has tried to create a clear distinction over the past few years is its design language. This year's Model 2 comes with a single-tone design with the iconic camera visor we've seen from previous iterations. The difference though is that the back now has a satin-like finish, which doesn't attract as many fingerprints as its glossy counterparts. I would say though, unlike other phones that look like state-of-the-art industrial slabs of glass and aluminium, Google's approach just feels more human. Though I would say it is very slippery to hold in hand, which kind of sucks if you like using your phone without a case. But hey, on the flip side, at least the visor does make it a bit easier to rest your finger on. It is also worth noting that ever since Google has made the switch to the metallic visor compared to the glass ones we'd seen on the 6 series, it has made them more prone to scuffs and scratches. I'm usually very careful whilst using most of my devices, but in the first week of me using the 8 Pro, all it took was a foot drop and the visor already has a scuff mark on it. Due to these reasons, I strongly recommend getting a skin or a case for this phone that protects the camera visor and also allows for firmer grip. Google has finally ditched the curved edges of the phone and switched back to the flat ones, which I think makes it look less premium, but I think in this battle of form versus function, function does win, as the flat sides do make it a bit easier to use the phone one-handed and also provide a wider surface area to grip on. The Pixels have always emphasized on good haptics, and as per usual, Google has outdone themselves this year, with the haptics feeling stronger than before, while somehow retaining a level of sharpness that almost feels unparalleled to any other device out there. The display too has been significantly improved this time around. It's a 1400p panel which has a slightly lesser pixel density compared to previous iterations, but I haven't noticed any difference whilst using it. It also has a 120Hz refresh rate with LTPO, which helps the display throttle down to 1Hz to save on battery. But by far the biggest improvement this year is that the Pixel 8 Pro boasts a display that peaks at 2400 nits of brightness under a well-lit environment. This is amongst the brightest displays you can find right now, surpassing the likes of the Apple and Samsung flagships. Now mind you, in most use cases, the brightest you can go is around 1600 nits, but that is still plenty bright. Just for some context, the unit of brightness, nits, works similarly to the law of diminishing returns, whereby the higher you go on the graph, the lesser you notice a perceivable difference. So something like 2400 nits of peak brightness on the 8 Pro isn't the same as being double of a device with 1200 nits of peak brightness, though it is noticeably brighter. Honestly, I'm quite impressed with it still being visible outdoors with the sun directly blasting at it, so I'm quite glad that Google addressed it on the 8 Pro. Sadly though, this year's Model 2 has an optical fingerprint scanner, which is kind of a bummer as I do feel it still requires some optimization. It often misses the mark and I wish Google would do what Samsung does, which is leave the fingerprint sensor on at all times regardless of whether or not my always-on display is enabled. On the flip side, Google has brought in Level 3 certified face unlock biometrics, which now allows it to work with various payment and banking apps. It seems to work well in the daylight, but at nighttime, it does struggle quite a bit. I wish that they would make it so that the screen would shift to a higher brightness level so that the camera can better recognize my face in those conditions. Another thing I noticed is that for some reason, if I make it so that the phone directly unlocks as soon as it detects my face, instead of me going through the additional step of swiping up to unlock, it completely removes the media player from the lock screen, which makes it very cumbersome for me to pause music or skip tracks when I'm on the go. The speakers have seen a tremendous improvement. On my 6 Pro at higher volumes, it would distort anything and everything I would use it for, be it podcasts, listening to music, or watching YouTube videos. The 8 Pro speakers sound much better with an ample amount of bass and clarity to vocals. While listening via Bluetooth though, I do feel that the audio is quite flat and dull for my liking, lacking an ideal amount of clarity, which leads me to constantly fiddle around with the EQ settings in a separate app since the native EQ of the Pixel is just too limited. I mean, once you find the right settings, this isn't really an issue, but again, for most people, It is just another hurdle to go through whilst trying to enjoy their new device. As usual on the Pixel, you do have a lot of other great features too. From hardware features like battery share to some software ones such as the ability to answer or decline your calls and snooze alarms using your voice via quick phrases, the ability to assign a shortcut by double tapping the rear side of your device, the godsend feature to quickly select a text or images whilst multitasking, translate what's on my screen via Google Assistant, the impeccable speech detection when using the Recorder app, or the voice enhancement feature when on calls, and so much more. Suffice to say, the Pixel is one of the smartest phones out there. With Android 14, Google has also added emoji-based or even AI-based wallpaper curation on the 8 series. They've also added better lock screen customization, though I do think that this is still a swing and a miss, as I do feel Apple's implementation of this feature is much better. This year's model also brings in an infrared thermometer sensor that allows you to take temperature readings of various objects. The sensor doesn't support skin temperature reading yet, but that is under FDA approval. A few use cases I thought that this could have been useful for in day-to-day scenarios would have been whilst cooking. But on second thoughts, just the idea of keeping my phone anywhere near a 300-degree searing hot cast iron pan does seem kind of unsettling to me. Some part of me also wishes for a LiDAR sensor instead, as that could have been more useful to create realistic depth maps in the cameras or be used to accurately measure day-to-day objects, because as it stands, the thermometer sensor on the Pixel 8 Pro does kind of seem like a gimmick to me. Speaking of performance, which was one of the major shortcomings of the previous Pixels, the Tensor G3 on the Pixel 8 Pro is comparable to last year's Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 in terms of raw performance. If you are a gamer or someone who does performance-intensive tasks on your device, this isn't really the phone for you. Now don't get me wrong, for most workloads or casual games or even some demanding titles, the phone can handle them just fine. But if you treat your device as the sole medium for gaming or productivity, this isn't really the phone for you. Pixels have always had the motto of hardware problems, software solutions, but in all honesty, I do find that to be quite misleading, as it tends to cover up the harsh reality. You see, Google's Tensor chip is based on Samsung's Exynos platform, and as we've seen with Samsung devices in the past, these chips aren't nearly as performant or efficient as their Snapdragon competitors, to a point whereby even Samsung had to eventually switch all their models over to the Snapdragon platform, so that they could offer a more consistent experience across all regions. And if the rumors are any true, Google is set to continue using the Exynos platform even on the Pixel 9 series, and it is not until the Pixel 10 that they'll finally make the switch to get them manufactured by TSMC. But I mean, considering that that chip will be the first one for a Pixel, I won't get my hopes up too high, as if history is any true, the first iteration of any new technology isn't the best one. In terms of storage, the phone is using the UFS 3.1 tech instead of the newer UFS 4.0, which roughly offers twice as fast read and write speeds whilst consuming 46% less power. But from my experience, in most use cases, I haven't noticed the slightest of hiccups or even bugs for that matter whilst using the Pixel 8 Pro. But I have noticed that the phone does get quite warm whilst using mundane apps like Instagram within just 10 minutes of me using the device, which I do think is kind of concerning. Now, the hiccup-free experience I've mentioned so far is with the stock Google UI or the Pixel launcher. Without getting sidetracked too far, we all know that the premise of Android has always been to allow its users to customize their device the way they want to. And that's exactly where third-party launchers come into play. These apps pretty much allow you to customize every facet of your device to your heart's content. You don't like the way there's always a search bar at the bottom of your screen? Well, you can change that. You feel it's harder to find a few apps of yours because you have so many of them? You can use a launcher to make it easier to access them. Point is, there's a launcher out there to suit everyone's needs. And at the end of the day, that's exactly what the notion of Android is all about. Not form following function, but it following feeling. But with changes made in the API ever since Android 12, using third-party launchers on the Pixels has been a very underwhelming experience. I've been using Niagara Launcher as my launcher of choice since the past 3 years, but on the Pixel 6 Pro and the 8 Pro this year, the animations just don't work as intended. Every time I try to open apps in quick succession, I'm met either with a flash screen or a still image of my home screen wallpaper. For a software interface that promotes customizability, I find this to be truly disappointing. On the other end, battery life has been pretty decent so far. I've been getting around 6 hours of screen on time, but considering it's a 5000 mAh battery and Google's own chip on board, I did expect a bit more. Maybe it's the software trying to adjust to my usage patterns, I'm unsure as of now, but I will talk more about this in my long-term review. The device now supports 30 watts of wired charging. Using an optimal charger, I was able to charge the 8 Pro from 0 to 100% in just about an hour and 20 minutes. This is a major improvement compared to my Pixel 6 Pro, which used to roughly take about 2 hours. The phone also supports 23 watts of wireless charging, but that will only work if you use the second generation of the Pixel stand. The phone doesn't support the new G2 wireless charging standard, so it will charge at a lower rate of 12 watts if you decide to use any of the other standard wireless chargers. On a side note, Google has changed the placement of the wireless charging coil on the Pixel 8 Pro. So if you are in the market for one of those MagSafe compatible cases, I would suggest getting ones that have the MagSafe ring slightly below the Google logo. Otherwise, the device won't charge at optimal speeds or just not charge at all. Alright, let's talk about cameras, as this is where Google gets an opportunity to shine each year. All the 3 sensors this year have been upgraded with face detect autofocus and optical image stabilization on the main and telephoto sensors, which means that they've become a lot more useful in a wider range of scenarios. In previous Pixels, the main lens was usually the star of the bunch, but this year, the quality gap between the 3 lenses has gotten a lot closer. Both the ultra-wide-angle and telephoto lenses have become much better and taken much more light thanks to the larger sensors, and you can clearly notice this in almost every scenario, as the photos look very detailed. The colors across all sensors look quite vibrant and punchy due to higher contrast. Once not accurate, look very pleasing to the eye, and they remain quite consistent while switching between the lenses as well. Apart from the improved macro shots from the ultra-wide-angle lens, they've also reduced the autofocusing issues on the telephoto lens, which is another great improvement. I would say though that the telephoto lens does have a weird tendency to stick to anything I'm shooting at. I've noticed this both while taking photos as well as shooting videos, so here's me hoping that Google might address this with a future software update. The nighttime shots look pretty good too, even though I've noticed that the pixels tend to overexpose the sky quite a bit under these conditions. The skies at night usually aren't this bright, but credit where due, most of the details are well preserved. Google has also added a pro mode for taking photos, which allows you to adjust the white balance, exposure, ISO, shutter speed, and the focus of your shot, and also the option to manually select and force the lens of your choice. Part of the reason why the cameras have gotten so much better is thanks to the new Ultra HDR tech on the back end. Without going into too much detail, this new technology allows for the rendering of images with greater contrast, crisper colors, and increased vibrancy on devices with HDR displays. The format is fully backwards compatible as it does support JPEG files, and thus can be viewed on pretty much any platform out there. The only drawback I find to this technology is compression issues and platform adoption on social media platforms. If you are keen in learning more about this technology, I'll leave a link to the article where they've explained it in much more detail, so be sure to check that out after watching this video. Portrait mode shots look alright. I do wish that they would add an option to adjust the intensity of the blur effect whilst previewing, but considering that we don't even get a preview of the shot with the effect on is something that Google should definitely work on. I found Google's real tone tech to be very underwhelming this year compared to previous iterations. Here are 2 photos side by side. The photo you see on the left is taken on the 8 Pro, and the one on the right is taken on my 6 Pro. Notice the way the 6 Pro retains my skin tone in a much better manner compared to the 8 Pro. My face just looks very pale and borderline lifeless on the 8 Pro. I'm not sure if it's because of a different sensor being used on the 8 Pro, but this could definitely use some improvement. Also, it's worth noting that you can't use the 5x telephoto sensor to shoot portraits. I'm unsure as to why this hasn't been an option on any Pixel since the first iteration of the telephoto lens on the 6 Pro, as this focal length does provide more flattering images. And I know you can add in the depth effect later, but unlike the iPhones from this year, the image doesn't retain the depth information, so the depth map isn't really accurate whilst editing in post. Apart from that, the rest of the camera modes stay pretty much the same. You have the action pan mode that lets you take some sick shots of moving objects, which from my experience works really well with cars. Long exposure that helps you take some nice pictures of waterfalls, light painting shots at night, and some unique portrait shots. These modes are really awesome, as if you were to try to take these photos from any other camera system, it would be a much longer process. Weirdly though, Google removed the photosphere option this year. It was a mode that allowed you to create some good panoramic and fisheye style shots. Not sure why they did that, but it is what it is. For the most part, I do think that this is a very good and capable camera system for taking photos, as it allows its users to get creative with their photography whilst not getting too technical in the details of it. Videos as well have seen a significant improvement this year, with all lenses now being capable of shooting at 4K 60 frames per second. And the best part is that you can now finally swap between lenses while filming. The videos in general look really good under well-lit conditions. The overall clarity and the way it handles light flares is much better compared to previous iterations and is definitely a step in the right direction. The low light video though does leave a bit to be desired, especially on the ultra-wide angle and telephoto lenses, as the footage does look a bit noisy. Apart from those modes, you have the cinematic pan and blur modes, which can be useful to get some creative shots. The 8 Pro, just like last year's 7 Pro, allows you to shoot in 10-bit HDR. Without getting too technical, most phones shoot in 8-bit video, which roughly covers over 16 million colors. While that's nothing to scoff at, 10-bit video on the other hand kicks this up a few notches and covers over a billion colors. More color information for the sensor not only translates to more accurate color reproduction, but also provides a lot of flexibility to edit these videos in post. The wider color spectrum also helps reduce banding, which are these faint lines you would see appear whilst looking at gradients in a video. The game changer though is that 10-bit video opens up the option for aspiring filmmakers to try out various log profiles. Here's a graph of a normal video. On the upper right are the highlights or the brightest parts of your video, and on the bottom left are the shadows or the darkest parts of your video. Log formats essentially allow you to preserve more detail in the highlights and shadows of the video. Using the right set of apps like Filmic Pro or MC Pro 24fps can allow users to try out the profiles of their choice from some of the best camera manufacturers out there. The result is well an overall faded look to the video, but it does allow for significantly more flexibility for correcting and grading this footage in post. In fact, the A-roll of this very video you're watching has been shot on the Pixel 8 Pro in Apple ProRes with the Rec 2020 color space. Now let's talk about AI, as this is where Google has laid a lot of emphasis this year. Let's start with the Magic Editor. Essentially, it's a full-blown editor that uses generative AI to move or remove anything you see in your photo. You are at a decently populated area and you want to remove a few people standing behind you, you can do that. You feel you could have framed the photo a bit better, well, you can change where your subject is positioned. You don't like the way the sky, water or various elements of nature look, you can change the way they look too. It's insane to me how far this technology has come, considering that this revolution had just started over a year ago, and also makes me a bit curious to what lies ahead. The only drawback I found of this feature is that it does require you to back up the photo to Google's servers. And understandably so, it does require internet connection. The most useful feature in my opinion though is best take. You know how sometimes when we take a group photo, 9 times out of 10, someone's face in the group just looks a bit off. Either they're looking somewhere else or blinking or just trying to act wacky. And by the time that they're looking fine, you've been holding that smile for so long that you eventually tend to give up. Well, Best Take aims to solve exactly that. It searches through the photos you've taken in quick succession and allows you to adjust each person's face from the images taken prior and get the perfect looking group shot. With the Pixel 8 Pro, Google has also introduced the audio editor feature, which uses AI to detect all kinds of different sounds in your recording and allows you to separate and tweak them individually. This feature works pretty well, but going on board with the noise suppression can lead to your voice sounding a bit tinny, so I would suggest using it accordingly. I can confirm that both these features do work without Wi-Fi or having to upload your photos or videos to Google servers, which is nice to have. Some features that also work without the Wi-Fi connection are the Magic Eraser and Camouflage features from last year's Pixel, the portrait lighting, the native sky color filters, and the on-blur feature. Now, without disregarding the camera and AI improvements that the Pixels have gone through this year, which I do think are quite notable, making the Pixel a very good choice for most people, I do think that it can get a bit better. The 50 megapixel aspect of shooting photos is only available in the normal photo and night side modes. I think it could have been useful for portrait mode shots as well. Also, it's worth noting that while shooting at 50 megapixels, you have to keep the phone steady for a second or two, meaning it isn't really helpful if you are taking photos of fast moving subjects. Honestly, this isn't a real deal breaker to me, as most of the times I'm shooting at 50 megapixels is to take a photo of a beautiful landscape or a scenery, in which case I am standing still, but I did think that it was worth pointing out. And by the way, the preview when shooting at 50 megapixels looks very blurry and noisy for some reason when compared to shooting at 12 megapixels. Aside from that, the Pro controls and manual lens selection options are only available whilst taking photos, specifically just in the normal photo mode and not videos. This, coupled with the fact that in low light situations the switch to the telephoto lens is kind of janky, means that this 5x sensor under those situations is pretty much unusable. Switching between lenses is still an issue on this year's Pixel, and this is something they've tried to address in the photo mode at 12 megapixels by adding a cross-dissolve like transition, but this isn't present in the video mode, making the switch look very jarring, causing the mentioned benefit of switching lenses at 4K 60 pretty much redundant. One reason I suspect that this is still an issue on the Pixels is because of the arrangement of the sensors on the camera visor. Moving from left to right, the first lens is the primary wide-angle lens, the second is the ultra-wide angle, and the third is the telephoto sensor, instead of the tried and tested arrangement that the competition has been using for quite a while, which is the ultra-wide angle, wide angle, and then the telephoto sensor. It is because the main wide angle and telephoto sensors are separated by the ultra-wide angle lens in the middle, resulting in a gap of roughly 2 centimeters that is causing the transition to not look as smooth. There's probably a logical reason as to why these sensors have been arranged in this manner from an engineering standpoint, but I guess we'll never know. Now, while Samsung and Apple are trying to push their video versatility each year, the Pixels still seem to be stuck where they were. The cinematic blur feature, for instance, is still capped at 1080p 24 frames per second, and you can only use it with the main sensor. While Samsung and Apple's initial offerings with this mode were capped at 1080p 24 as well, they have slowly crept up and improved it to support 4K 30 frames per second since the past 1 or 2 years. The action mode, on the other hand, is another such mode. Once the competition has slowly crept up to support 2.5 and 2.7K resolutions on the Galaxy S23 and the iPhone 15 Pro respectively, the Pixels are still stuck at 1080p. But the worst part is that they're still stuck at 1080p at 30 frames per second. This can be a bit annoying, as for action videography, you would require support for high resolutions and frame rates to preserve the overall quality and smoothness of the video. The aforementioned 10-bit video, on the other hand, is still capped at 4K 30 frames per second across all lenses, whilst the competition has been offering 4K 60 for quite a while. Google is also planning to introduce night sight video using its Video Boost technology later this year, which would make a copy of the video you shoot using that mode and send it to their servers, and once back would result in a much improved version of the video with better lighting, colors, and detail. But since this would be HDR video as well, this too will be capped at 30 frames per second. What I'm further bummed out by though is the experience behind taking a photo. You see, Google recently revamped their camera app, separating the photo and video modes under a toggle. They also flipped certain aspects of the UI, like the gallery access is now from the bottom left instead of the bottom right. But what I found to be the most noticeable change was that in prior versions of the app, the brightness, white balance, and exposure settings were very easy to access and always existed on the left and right sides of the UI. But after this update, they're now found on the bottom right, under a button, and honestly, it just adds more hurdles for me from taking a good shot. I also wish that they'd add something like the photographic styles feature from the iPhone, which pretty much allows you to make custom presets and make it so every photo you take follows the stylistic look that you're looking for. I think it would save a bunch of time for most of us, as you wouldn't have to tinker with the image later on. Lastly, the real-time preview in the camera app looks very choppy. For comparison, here's me panning the phone across the photo mode, video mode at 4K 60 frames per second, and the cinematic pan mode, which oddly I found to give me the smoothest real-time preview compared to the other modes. I've also noticed that if you shoot a photo and immediately try to preview it, it does take some time to load. This is especially noticeable when trying to take portrait mode shots, as this is where the lack of better processing horsepower is the most apparent. Also, every time you open the Google Photos app and try viewing a photo, you'd notice that each photo you try previewing would initially show up in SDR and then take a second or so to show up in Ultra HDR. I don't know why the camera experience of the Pixels are so consistently inconsistent this year, but I really hope that Google can somehow address this and make it more cohesive. Alright, finally time to address the elephant in the room, region exclusivity. As mentioned in my Pixel 6 Pro review, the Pixels are the only phones that have so many of their features region locked. Most of the more interesting features like call screening, Hold for Me, the Busy Hours feature showing up in the phone dialer when trying to book an appointment or reservation, and even some safety features like car crash detection are all locked to just a handful of countries. Even 5G support, whilst being actively expanded through the Android QPR beta programs, is still not available in a lot of regions. Adding more fuel to this flame, a few more features this year have been added to this list. The Google VPN, and surprisingly, the summarized web page feature of the Google Assistant. Some of these features I understand may not work everywhere, such as the call screening or the Google VPN, but I find it hard to understand why others like 5G have taken them so long to figure out. I don't know how much longer these features will stay the same, but hey, at least Google has offered 7 years of Android OS updates for the Pixel 8 series, and it's not like we've ever seen them break their promises. And even if they did, we can give them a second chance, or maybe a third or a fourth, or even a fifth or sixth if they really need it. On a serious note though, I can say what this promise does allow for is the redemption arc for the Pixel saga, and whilst I do look forward to that, as it stands at this very moment, I do think it still has a very long way to go. So at the end of the day, would I recommend this phone to anyone? Well, sort of. There are a lot of aspects in this video that I do acknowledge are very niche things that only a handful amount of folks would use or notice, but I do think that some, like switching lenses while shooting videos, or the janky preview of the camera app, or even the heating issues depending on whether or not you win the draw of getting a stable phone, until fixed, incline me towards being a bit cautious before recommending it to anyone. And believe me, it's not even like I've gone out of my way to find any of these issues, nor is it the first time that I'm encountering any of them, as you can clearly tell after watching my Pixel 6 Pro review. Whilst I do appreciate that Google has tried to create a much better experience with the 8 Pro compared to their last few phones, the Pixel line is yet to reach its peak potential. It's nice to see Google trying to create a pivotal shift from the best of what they were capable of doing to now the best of what they think might help them increase their market share by catering to the mainstream audience. But this shift has also resulted in the Pro models not feeling as pro as the competition this year, as Pro phones shouldn't compromise on any aspect. While this shift has definitely helped them increase their sales numbers this year, as on the surface level, this device does nearly check every pillar of what a smartphone should do, I do think that it ignores a vocal minority that once helped them build this brand. Tech enthusiasts like a lot of us. Improving on these little things could have shown us that the company, regardless of being a corporate entity, is trying to offer a well-rounded product, especially when the competition is making phones for the mainstream whilst catering to the enthusiast crowd as well. But what seems to happen each year is that they keep introducing new features whilst ignoring their existing set, resulting in a half-baked experience, leaving with a lot of us unsatisfied with their final offering. This, alongside the increase in price of about $100, euros or pounds, depending on the region you live in, positions the Pixel in a very weird spot, not only from a value for money factor which they were previously known for, but with respect to competition. The Galaxy S23 Ultra right now is selling for around $900 US. And while yes, Google has tried to bring in some aspects from a high-end phone like a brighter display, a great camera system for taking photos, and a bunch of cool AI features, it is held back by a certain level of cohesiveness and consistency, making the S23 Ultra quite an enticing buy for a lot of people. I know that this video has somewhat been all over the place, but I just wanted anyone purchasing this device to know what they're exactly getting into. Barring that, if you do get the Pixel, I hope you enjoy the experience it offers, and if you want me to cover any other aspects of the phone in my long-term review, let me know in the comments. That being said, this has been Siddharth Toprani, and I'll catch you in the next one.